pretty easy daf. So Be'ezus Hashem. By tomorrow probably will be our last daf before Yom Tiv, because I guess everybody's doing B'dikas Chametz on Thursday night, and then we have the Yom Tiv. I just heard that Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, there was a big. He used to take in his apartment. It would take between 2.5 to 3 hours to do the B'dikas Chametz in his apartment. So there was a wealthy guy who wanted to offer him to buy him a larger apartment. Yeah, I think he had 8 kids in that 2.5 bedroom apartment, and he refused because he said, you know what, the B'dikas Chametz is going to take in that apartment will take me like 6 hours. So he stood. Anyway, okay. So we're discussing the topic like this. We learned before that let's say a woman who is pregnant falls to Yibum. So we should technically, you should wait till she gives birth. Because if she gives birth, it turns out she doesn't fall to Yibum. But what happens if she had chalitza? One of the brothers gave her chalitza. And then it turned out that she miscarried. So if she miscarried, if the woman miscarried, then it turns out she was required to do chalitza. So Rabbi Yochanan said, you don't have to repeat the chalitza. That's Rabbi Yochanan over chalitza. And Rish Lakish says that if you give chalitza to a pregnant woman and then she miscarries, you need to redo the chalitza. So that was a big machlokes, a fundamental machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, and it really affected how we learn pshat in the Mishnah. So let's just go further. And basically, the halacha is going to come out to like Rish Lakish, that Rish Lakish said that you have to repeat the chalitza. Meisvei, let me ask you a question. You have a brisa. Brisa says hakoines es yivimtoi, someone who did yibam with a yavama v'nimtzis mubaris, and we find out she's pregnant. So the woman is pregnant. And it turns out that he was not supposed to do yibam, because if she gives birth to a normal child, then he had znus with his eishes ach. So, but besides that, the Brisa says harezu loisi nasei tzarasa. The tzara of that, the co-wife, should not get married, and they should not get married. Now, why does the co-wife not get married? One woman already had yibam. Why should not the co-wife get married? So the Brisa says something strange. Shema yehei volad ben kayama. Maybe the child will be born normal, and therefore the tzara should not be, the co-wife should not get married. What does that mean? Adarabah, just the opposite. Ki hava havlad ben kiyama. If the lady gave birth to a normal child, mi patra tzarasa, then automatically that means these two women should not have fell to yibam, because the deceased left over a valid child, and therefore the co-wife is already exempt from yibam and chalitza. So why should you telling me that she should not get married? Ella ema, you must read the Bryce a little bit differently. The concern is shema lo yehe volad ben kiyama. Maybe the child will not be a child that survives, and therefore, so what? You did yibam when one of them did yibam while the woman was pregnant, and then she gives birth to him and she miscarries, right? So according to that methodology, so it depends who you hold like. If you hold bias mu'ubarish mabia, the fact that he did yibam, one of the brothers did yibam when she was pregnant, is called a good yibam, right? It's called a good bia. Amai loitinase tzarasa. Why shouldn't you be able to marry the tzara, the co-wife? The co-wife was exempt because there was yibam done. She should be exempt because the other one did yibam. So that's a question against Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan holds that the chalitza mu'uberes is a good chalitza, and bias mu'uberes is a good chalitza, is a good yibam. And here from this brisa, it seems to say it would not be a good yibam, and that's why the tzara should not get married, because she was married. She got married as a yibam. She went too early. Amar Abaya changes everything around. Bebia, to do yibam and have relations, it doesn't work. And if you had yibam with a mubaris, and even if she gives miscarriage, you have to repeat it. There's no question about that. Everybody agrees with that. Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. When is Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish arguing? Chalitza. You give chalitza to the woman while she's pregnant. Rabbi Yochanan saw chalitzas mu'uberes shma chalitza bia mu'uberes loy shma bia. Although Rabbi Yochanan holds when you do chalitza to a pregnant woman, and it turns out that she miscarried and you did already chalitza, you don't have to repeat it because the chalitza that you gave to a pregnant woman is good at chalitza. So, but nevertheless, bias mu'uberes, if you did yibam, that's not called a bia, and you have to repeat the yibam. You have to do bia again. Rish Lakish Saba, but Rish Lakish holds, no, bia mu'uberes lo shma bia, but chalitzas mu'uberes lo shma chalitza. Both don't work on a pregnant woman, the bia and the chalitza. So that's why this Bryce is not a question against Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan would agree that bias mu'uberes lo shma bia. Rava says, I don't understand the way Rabbiya split the atom with Rabbi Yochanan. Manashach. No matter what, if you hold bias mu'uberes shma bia, then chamitzas mu'uberes shma chalitza. If you hold one works, then the chalitza should work. And if you hold vi bias mu'uberes lo shma bia, the bia of a pregnant woman is not a good bia, then chalitzas mu'uberes name lo shma chalitza. Then chalitza should work. They always have to align themselves. Dokai Milan, because we have a general rule that we go to Lamed Vavam at Aleph, the chol ha'oila liyibam oila chalitza, the chol she'ena oila liyibam, eina oila chalitza. Whatever you can do yibam with, then you can do chalitza with. If it's a woman that you can't do yibam with, then there's no chalitza there. And if you're telling me a pregnant woman, yibam doesn't work, then chalitza would not work either. So how do you explain Rabbi Yochanan? Rava will say like this. Hachi Kamar. This is the way Rabbi Yochanan will explain the Brisa, so it's not difficult against him. Hakoinis event. The Brisa says like this: if you marry a Yavama, Benimsis Mubaris, and she's pregnant, Harezi loy tenase tzarasa. Her tzara should not get married at that point, because you can argue and say, look, if she gives birth to a pregnant, if the pregnant lady gives birth, then it turns out they never fell to yibam, so the co-wife was permitted to get married to somebody else. And if you want to say that she gives birth to a miscarriage, then it turns out, but he did yibam already, because according to Rabbi Yochanan, bias mu'uberes is called bi'ir. So the Brisa says no, because the point is shema yehei voler ben kayama. Maybe the child will survive. And what is pattering this woman, the tzara, on both of these ladies from Yibam and Chalitza is because the deceased brother had a child. And Ubias Mubaris Loishma Bia Chalitzas Mubaris Loishma Chalitza, the Bia Mubaris done at that time is not a Yibam anymore, because it turns out that the child survived. But the problem is the co-wife cannot get married until the child was born. So therefore, a vlad, a child coming out of the Yavama, will not exempt the women from Yibam or Chalitza until he's actually born. So therefore, if she goes ahead and gets married before this child is born, and then the child is born, turns out she got married in sin. So that's why that's why it says Harei zu loitinas itzrasa. The tzara should not get married so fast. You should wait at least till the child is born. Tanya Kavase the Rava, and we have a brisa that agrees with Rava's interpretation of how you read the brisa. The brisa says Hakoinis yudinto benimtzis mubaris Harei zu loitinas itzrasa. Someone marries the Yavama, then the co-wife should not get married. Why? Because Shema Yehevala ben Kayama. The wife that did Yibam will have a normal child. And ve'en bi of Chalitza Pateres. And therefore, it's not the bi in the Chalitza that exempts the women from Yibam, but Ela Volad Poita, the fact that the deceased had a child. And therefore, The child doesn't exempt anybody from Yibam and Chalitza until he's actually born. So if you let her get married too early into the game, and then she got married when there's still a Zika on her. So that's why the Brisa says she should not get married until actually the child is actually born. Then the Gemara says, well, if that's a Brisa, that's another Brisa that seems to go, that Brisa seems to go with the version of Rabbi Yochanan, because Tama, the Ben Kayamu, the Brisa seems to imply that it's only because if the child that's born is a normal child, that's the problem. But if you know for a fact that she's going to miscarry, so then you're going to say, Miptar Tsarasa. Then the Tsara, the co-wife, will be exempt. Then she could go free. If as soon as the child miscarries, is a miscarriage, the Tsara, the co-wife, can go free. And she can marry somebody else. And we don't require that the Yavam should redo to redo a Bia to make Yavama, because the fact he did Bia, although she was pregnant, it's still good. Would this be a refutation against Rish Lakish? Rish Lakish says that Bia Mu'uberes is not considered a good Bia. You have to redo it. Amalach Rish Lakish will say, Hachik Tani, this is what's said in the Brisa. You have to, according to Rish Lakish, you have to change a word in the Brisa. If you marry a Yavama and we find out she's pregnant, you should not marry the co-wife. Why? Shema lo yehev lad ben kayamo. Maybe the child would not survive. And v'chalitzas mu'beres lo yiteichma chalitza v'chbias mu'beres lo yishma bia. Because if the child doesn't survive, turns out that this woman is supposed to fall to Yibam, both the woman and the co-wife. And the fact that you were kindness, you actually had bia once, that's not good bia. A bia for a yavam has to be a certain bia, we know for a fact that she's not pregnant. But if she's pregnant, that bia wouldn't work for yavama. So that's what the Brisa says. Look, because maybe the child will not be a vlad sheben kayama, not a survivable child. And then, but the Brisa says something about a child doesn't pater until it comes out of the world. The imtaimar. So the Brisa continues, and this is how you read the Brisa. Halech al chureva noshim. Why don't we say that we should go after most women? And v'roiv noshim vlad ma'ali yoldan. Most women give birth to a normal child, a normal pregnancy. So let us assume that the Brisa asks a question. Let us assume that the child will survive, and therefore this woman was exempt. This woman would not fall to Yibam because there's actually the deceased had a child. If you want to say that, yes, I will agree with you, says the Brisa, but she can't get married right away. Because Valad, having a child, a child, a Yavama, having a child will not exempt the woman until he's actually born. Therefore, the Brisa says she should not get married right away. Wait till the child is born, and then you can get married. Then she can get married. So both ways, you could learn this Brisa according to Rabbi Yochanan, and you could learn this Brisa according to Rish Lakish. Again, the Shita of Rish Lakish is that if a man does Yibam or Chalitza to a pregnant Yavama, it doesn't work. If she miscarries, you have to redo the Yibam and Chalitza. So Amar Rab Lazar says, everybody, it seems that Rish Lakish was so adamant to change a language of a Brisa. It must be that Rish Lakish has a source from a Mishnah that agrees to him. So Rab Lazar wanted to defend his Rebbe Rish Lakish and find a real Tanaic source in the Mishnayos that says that. Nafak, he researched Dak Ba'ashkach, and he was careful, and he discovered a Mishnah that seems to agree with Rish Lakish. The Tanah we learned in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says later on in Masechet Yevamos, Ha'isha shaholach bala v'tzarasum dinas yam. Let's say a woman whose husband and her co-wife went on a trip, overseas trip, and she never heard from them. Vol the Amrullah, and they told her, Meis Balach, your husband died. Now, does she fall to Yibam? There's no children. Well, could be that the co-wife in Medina Sayyam had a child. So the Mishnah says, Harezu loitinase, she should not get a chalitza and not get married. Loitisyabim. Notice this word tinase means get married. The loitisyabim, she doesn't get Yibam. Probably the opposite of Yibam is chalitza. Why? Shema until she knows for a fact that maybe did her co-wife give birth or not? She has to know what's the story with the co-wife. Did she give birth to a child or not? So she's basically doesn't do chalitza or yibam. That's what the Mishnah says. To understand this Mishnah, so you have to understand it in light of Rish Lakish's opinion, and only according to Rish Lakish's opinion. So the Gemara holds that this Mishnah would make sense. Bishlama yabume loy. We tell, first of all, this lady that remained behind, did not go on the trip, you can't do Yibam. Shema, why? Yehe Vlad ben Kayama. Maybe there was a child born by your co-wife overseas, a normal child, and therefore, if we tell you that you could do Yibam, then you're meddling in with an isser of the brother's wife, because if you do Yibam, you're really not supposed to do Yibam because your co-wife gave birth to a normal child. Why shouldn't she do chalitza? Why wouldn't it help chalitza? If it turns out that the co-wife gave birth to a normal child, then the chalitza was worthless anyway, and she was permitted to get married. So the Gemara explains, goes further. Why can't she get a chalitza during the 9 months and get married within the 9 months, after her husband died? Let's say she hears about that her husband died. If she gets chalitza within the 9 months, perhaps her co-wife was pregnant at that time. And therefore, when she gets chalitza, that chalitza is not going to work if one of the women is pregnant. So you can't tell her that she get chalitza right now and get married within the 9 months, loy, hainu sufik. That is the exact doubt. In other words, maybe the other wife is pregnant, and if you get chalitza over here, that chalitza is not going to work because chalitza mu'uberes is not a good chalitza. And so Ella, what does the Mishnah mean? What does the Mishnah mean? That's why the Mishnah says she can't get chalitza within the 9 months and get married within the 9 months. And that's how the Mishnah makes sense. Ella, what the Mishnah seems to imply that what rather you should do, tachlois b'soich tisha, the Mishnah seems to say that you could be able to get chalitza within the 9 months, v'tinasei la'achar tisha, and she should be able to get married after the 9 months. So why can't that work? If you hold chalitza mu'uberes is a good chalitza. So it must be, since the Mishnah does not give you that advice, the Mishnah tells you she should not get married and she should not do Yibam. So the way the Gemara is learning now is that she should not do Yibam or chalitza during the first 9 months. It must be that during the first 9 months, we don't allow a chalitza because it could be a chalitza mu'uberes, which wouldn't work anyway. That's why the Mishnah seems to say, the way Rish Lakish is going to learn, wait till after 9 months and then do chalitza. So this Mishnah seems to agree with Rish Lakish that chalitza mu'uberes is not a good chalitza. So the Gemara asks, the Gemara asks back, according to your reasoning, the Gemara still, the word loitinase means she should never get married. That's what loitinase means. And according to your reasoning, the Mishnah should be much clearer and should say that she could get chalitza and she could get married after 9 months. Loitinase implies she should never get married until she knows for a fact what's the story with the co-wife. So Ella, this is not a raya to Rish Lakish. This Mishnah is not a raya to Rish Lakish. And it's a totally different reason why this lady should never get married. The Abaya, Bar Abba, Rav Chinina, Bar Abaya, Damrit Abayu, Shema Yehe Vlad ben Kayama. That the Mishnah is concerned that maybe overseas the co-wife gave birth to a normal child. And if she gets chalitza over here, it turns out over here, the wife that remained behind, she gets chalitza. She didn't need chalitza because the co-wife overseas gave birth to a normal child. And then you're going to have to make an announcement that she's permitted to marry a kohen, because the chalitza is not it was a worthless chalitza. It was a pasala chalitza. She didn't need it, and therefore, that's going to be a problem if she's going to want to marry a kohen. So the Gemara says, let us require that Bezin should make an announcement and put it in all the papers that this woman had a chalitza psula, and therefore she is permitted to marry a kohen. So the Gemara says that's not the case. Dilma ike inish tahabe bechalitza, because maybe like there are people that come to a chalitza. It's not such a common thing. So there are a lot of people going to be at the chalitza, and v'loy have bachraza. They're not going to read in the paper that the chalitza was a pasla. So, and then she's going to try to marry a kohen, v'asa l'meimar, and people are going to say, k'shar chalitza l'kohen, that always a chalitza is permitted through a kohen. So therefore, they made a whole thing over here that that she should not get married until the child can be shown up in court, or she should bring back the co-wife's kid, and everybody can see that the reason why she's getting married is because the deceased brother had a child, and because he had a child, she was permitted to get married. But to do a chalitza because of a suffix, that we won't do, because that might lead to her marrying a kohen, and people will make a mistake and think that a chalutza could marry a kohen. One more thing, Omalei Abaya, midi loy tachlis loy tisiyabin ketani. Rabbi just says no. Maybe the whole brisa could be a riot even to Rabbi Yochanan, and because the brisa doesn't say don't get chalitza and don't get yibam. The brisa says, the Mishnah says loy tinasei v'loy tisiyabin ketani. Mishnah says don't get married and don't do yibam. What it means is below chalitza. If you did chalitza, even during right away, that would work. So there's no riot from this Mishnah either to Resh Lakish or Rabbi Yochanan. You could swing it either way, and that's why Abaya said it can't go according to Rabbi Yochanan, and even before we said it wouldn't. We could even interpret it according to Rabbi Yochanan as well. So this Mishnah is not a clear proof to Rabbi Yochanan, to Resh Lakish. But here is the bottom line. There's a proof on an explicit brisa, and that will end the subject. Tanya kavasi Rish Lakish. Hachoylitz mubaris. A guy gives chalitza to a yavama that's pregnant, vehipila, and then she miscarried. So then it turns out the chalitza should have been a good chalitza, right? She's supposed to fall to yibam and yibam or chalitza, but it doesn't work because at the time you gave it, you didn't know. So therefore, tzricha chalitza menachem. She needs another chalitza from the brothers because the first chalitza was invalid. Amar Rava. So Rava says, now, hilkasei kavasi Rish Lakish b'hani plas. The following three cases, we paskin like Rab Shlakish. In other words, most of the time, you paskin like Rab Yochanan. He was the Rebbe. But in these three cases, we paskin like Rish Lakish. Chada, the first case is Hada Amram. Our discussion here of Chaylitz Muberes. There's an explicit brisa that agrees with Rish Lakish. Idach, what would be another case you paskin like Rish Lakish? It's now we learned in a Mishnah. This Mishnah is a Masechta B'Chayris, which discusses a father who does not want to follow the halachas in the Torah, which says give pishnayim to when he divides up his assets, that the Bechor inherits double and the rest is split equally. But he wants to give out his assets while he's still alive to his favorite children. So that can work, as long as he doesn't say that he's doing it because this is the Yerusha. Hamachalik nechasav al pev. He's dividing his assets while he's still alive. He's on his deathbed. He wants to divide up his assets. Riba le'echad, miya le'echad. If he gave one kid more, one son more, one son less, or v'hishvel lehem es b'chor, and he equalized the oldest child to get just as much as everybody else, he can decide what to do. Devarev kayamim. Whatever he says stays. That can work. But if he says, Mishum Yerusha, I want to follow the ways of the Torah of inheritance, and he decides who gets what, that doesn't work. Loi amaklum. It doesn't work because that's making a condition going against the Torah. The Torah has a specific way to how to divide up the assets, where the Bechor gets pishnayim and everybody gets equally. But if you decide that I want the Yerusha of the Torah to follow my directives, then it doesn't work. So therefore, you have to say that I'm gifting it to the child, not I'm inheriting it to the child. If he says the word, I'm gifting it to my children, even though he uses the word Yerusha word in the beginning of a sentence or the middle of a sentence. For example, in the beginning of a sentence, he says, like Rashi at the bottom, I want to gift my child this field, and he should inherit it. So he's gifting it and using the language of the Torah of inheritance. Or be'emso, if we put it into the middle of the word, so he sandwiched the word gift in between two words of Yerusha, or Labasayf, Yerusha v'tinasalai. It doesn't matter where you put the word matana, dvarv kayamin, it works. We go to Amid Beis. The Amr Rish Lakish, and here is where Rish Lakish, we're going to paskin like Rish Lakish. What happens, a guy, not on the Mishnah, but a guy uses two languages, Yerusha and gifting, Yerusha and gift, but to one kid he uses the word Yerusha, and one kid he uses the word gift. So then, so he didn't use the word matana and Yerusha to one child. He used to one child, he used the word Yerusha. To the other child, he used the word matana. So Rabbi Yochanan said it's still good. Since you had the word matana in your language, we follow the matana directive. But Rish Lakish says no. For Rambam Rish Lakish says it doesn't work. Until he says Pliny will get this following place, that I gave it to them and they could inherit it. So if he puts in the word nesatim to both kids, that's when it can work. But if he uses the word Yerusha to one kid and matana to another kid, it's invalid. And you would have to follow the directive of the Yerusha of the Torah. But if you combine to all the children, you use the word gift, then you can follow the directives that you decided, and you don't have to follow what the Torah decided. And therefore, that's another place where we would paskin like Rish Lakish. What is the third place in all of Shas would be paskin like Rish Lakish? Again, it has to do with inheritance. A guy, let's say, has a property, and he wants to gift it. So he's doing estate planning. And so the Mishnah says, Titnan, HaKoisef kol nechasov l'noi. All his property, he says, belongs to my child, la'acha moiseh, after I die. But he's keeping the rental income, let's say, while he's still alive. So his son owns the property, but the rental income belongs to the father as long as he's alive. So the Mishnah says, the father has no right to sell the property because he gave it already to the son. The son cannot sell because the father still owns the rental income. But the Mishnah says, if the father sells it, he sells his share of the rental income. That's a good sale until he dies. Then he can sell all the rental income until he dies. But after he dies, then the rental income belongs to the son. So that the father can do. Mocha haben, but if the son sells the property itself, the buyer has nothing to it until the father dies, because the father has the right to get the payros, which is the rental income. So the purchaser has nothing. Not only until the father dies, when he's out of the picture and the son sold it to him, he can now own the property itself. The itmar, and there's another teaching and a machlekes regarding that brisa, regarding that Mishnah. What happens in this case? Mochar haben b'chaya av. The son sold the property and the father was still alive. Umeisa ben, and then the son died b'chaya av, and the father was still alive. And so that's a little different, because in the Mishnah's case, the son never died. So perhaps everything reverts to the father now. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan Amar loy kana lakeach. Even when the father will die, the purchaser who bought it from the son does not acquire ownership, because the fact that the father maintained rental income, he owned the payros of this property. So that put it in such a way that it's almost as if he owned the property. He owned the property, and the son had no right to sell. Of Resh Lakish Amar, Resh Lakish says, then the purchaser bought it. Now, according to Rabbi Yochanan, the selling of the son is not a good sale, but in our Mishnah it's very different, because the Mishnah says that the purchaser doesn't have anything until the father dies. But when the father dies, he does have it, because when the father died in the life of the child, then the child can do whatever he wants and sell the property. But here the child died first, so now the fact that the child sold before his death, he didn't even own it yet, because the father still owned the Paris. So the Gemara, what's the svara of the machlokes? Rabbi Yochanan Amar loy kana lekeach kinyan Paris kikina naduf gami. Rabbi Yochanan holds the fact that the father owns the income, the Paris, so therefore it says almost as he owned the property, so the son had no right to sell it, and it still only belongs to the father. Resh Lakish says the son had a right to sell, because what does the father own? He only owns the Paris, the fruits. He gifted already the land itself, and once he gifted the land itself, the son had a right to sell it. Kana lekeach. Why? The purchaser bought it. Kinyan Paris, the purchase of the owning of the fruits. Lav kinyan aguf dami. It's not as if you own the property itself. And therefore, according to Resh Lakish, the sale of the son is valid. Okay, so the Mishnah just pointed out three things where we would paskin like Rish Lakish. Okay, just a little bit longer, a few more, one more topic, and that's it. The Mishnah said that, let's say you made yibam on a pregnant woman. Okay, that's what the Mishnah said. And ein havlad shel kiyama, and it turns out the pregnant woman miscarried. So the yibam is good. According to Rabbi Yochanan, you don't have to redo the yibam. According to Rish Lakish, you just redo the yibam. You're kind, but you could keep the wife. But we learn a brisa that argues with our Mishnah. Mishum Rab Lezer Omer Yotzi beget. You have to give her a get. Perhaps you have to give her a get. He says you can't live with this wife because you were meyabim, a pregnant woman. Who gave you right to do that? You did an avera against the words of the Chachamim. And therefore, we force you to divorce this woman. Even if you say that the yibam turned out to be a good yibam, but Chachamim don't want you doing yibam on a pregnant woman. And you did it. So therefore, even if it turns out that you are correct because she miscarried, you have to give her a get. It's a knas. Amar Rava, Rav Rava said, Rab Meir and Rab Lazar amru davar echad. Rab Meir and Rab Lazar both agree on one item, that if you marry against the will of the Chachamim, they can force you to divorce your wife. Rab Lezer Hada Amram. We just gave you the case of Rab Lezer, a person did yibam on a woman that's pregnant. Rab Meir, there's another case. Rab Meir says, don't marry a person, and if you go get married, you find a rabbi that marries you, Bezdin should force you to get a divorce. What case is that? The Tanya we learned in a brisa. Lo yisa odamu beres chaveir menekes chaveira. A person should not marry a widow, right, of a woman that's pregnant or nursing, and the child doesn't belong to you; it belongs to somebody else. Because we are afraid that if once you're going to have relations with this woman, she's going to stop nursing because she may become pregnant, and she will stop nursing, and therefore, or something will happen to the pregnant child. So therefore, they didn't want you to marry a woman that's pregnant or she's nursing. Be'im nasa, but if you do get married, yotzi, you have to give a divorce. And you can never remarry her again. This is the word of Meir. Chachamim says yotzi. Chachamim say we're going to learn what yotzi means. You have to give her a divorce. At a later time, you could remarry this woman again. Yichnois, you could remarry this woman. Why could you remarry this woman? After 24 months where she's not nursing anymore, or after 9 months she gave birth, then you could remarry her. Even though you married her be'isser, you can remarry her. But Rameir knast and said you can never remarry her. You shouldn't have married her in the first place. So it's only Issa D'Rabbanan of marrying her in this case. So Rameir and Abelazar both agree in one place. Amalei Abai Mimai. How do you know Rabbi Lezer and Rameir are both of agreement? It's not so. Atkan like Rabbi Lezer Hacha. Rabbi Lezer didn't say over here by the case of Yibam with the Mu Beres Elam Shundu Gabaga but Issa Esha Achadaraisa, because there's a chance you're meddling around with an Issa Esha Ach, because if she would give a birth to a normal child, then you did a terrible thing. You had relations with your brother's wife. So therefore, Rabbi Lezer gave the knas. Aval Hossam the Rabban. It's only an Isser the Rabbanan to marry a pregnant woman or a nursing woman. So maybe Karabanan Svirale, maybe Rabbi Lezer wouldn't be so strict and it would allow you to divorce and when the time comes to remarry that woman. Iname, you can say just the opposite. Rameir was very strict by over here. Atkan loy komer Rameir Hossam by the case over there. I'm sorry. By the case over there, marrying a pregnant woman and a nursing woman, Rameir was very strict. You can never stay with this woman. El Mishum Darabanan, because you were over in Issa Darabanan. And the Chachamim also chizuk l'davrei yosim shel Torah. Chachamim strengthened their words more than the Torah. And therefore they said that you did an avera marrying this pregnant woman and this nursing woman. You have to divorce and stay away from this woman forever in your life. Aval hacha, but in our Mishnah, if you were miyabim a pregnant woman, and we don't know, you have to wait till she gives birth if you can stay with her. Mifresh parshimene, maybe Rameir just separate, see it, determine if she gives birth to a normal child, and if she miscarries, then you can stay with each other. So maybe Rameir would be lenient in our Mishnah, like our Mishnah, that you can stay with her. Finally, we'll just end here. Amar Rava. Rava explains that the Chachamim said that if a person marries a pregnant woman or the nursing woman, the divrei chachamim yatzia baget. You have to first divorce her, and then at a later time you should remarry her, as I explained, after the child is weaned off nursing or after the woman gets birth, depending on the case. The Mishnah, the Bryce is very precise. The Ketani, the Bryce says, according to Chachamim, yotzi. Yotzi means divorce. The Bryce doesn't say just separate from each other. Yotzi means you need a full-fledged divorce. Shma mina, that's what the Bryce, that's what the way Rav interpreted Chachamim, that you have to give a full-fledged divorce. Okay. So we finish this story, and we'll continue it tomorrow, Mezes Hashem.
Oh, we are having tomorrow.
Tomorrow, and then Thursday we'll stop. Thursday we'll take the break for the Yom Tov.
Okay, thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.